Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot daf Pei Gimel. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with a quick review of what we were up to. We started with the Mishnah. Basically gave us the background to the previous Mishnah, which is how do we know that if you say Harei Alai Todah and you take something on as obligatory, that you have to bring it from the Chulin. And we said we learn it from Pesach. Because it says V'zavachta Pesach, you should bring the Korban Pesach. Min habakar V'zavachta Pesach Hashem Elokechat Sonu Bakar. Now we don't use bakar for the Korban Pesach. We only use tzon, right? The sheep family, the sheep, the lambs. We don't bring it from the cattle. So what's that doing there? It's coming to tell you that there's korbanot that are brought from the bakar that are like the Korban Pesach, which basically means anything that's davar shebachovah, that's obligatory, only comes from chulin. Then the Gemara immediately said, where do we know the Pesach comes only from chulin? To which Rabbi Eliezer said, we learned it from Pesach in the time of the desert. There was in the time actually from Mitzrayim, the first Pesach. And then we said maybe even from the desert, where there was no Maaser Sheni. So because they didn't have Maaser Sheni, so they didn't bring it from Maaser Sheni, so they had to bring it from Chulin. From there we learned to all the other years, and we had some back and forth between him and Rabbi Akiva, who didn't want to accept this drasha, and it was based on saying, we can be Danim Efshar Mishi Efshar, we can learn something that's possible, that we can't do it, even from a case where it's impossible to do it. And if it was impossible, they didn't have Maaser Sheni then we can learn to a case where you could bring Maaser Sheni, but we don't allow it. Rabbi Akiva didn't accept that drasha at all, and then the Gemara wanted to know, so how does Rabbi Akiva know that Pesach comes only from Chulin? Okay, and that's what we're on a search for, but to get there, we're going to take a very long-winded route, because first they start with, we're basically going to learn that Rabbi Akiva darshans it from this pasuk, Zot HaTorah L'Olam L'Mincha L'Chatat L'Hasham L'Miluim L'Zevach Shlamim, which is the second to last pasuk in the whole section of the Korbanot. Okay, and Zayin Lamed Zayin. Today we're going to see Zayin Lamed Chet, the next pasuk. But that pasuk basically compares all the korbanot to each other for all different laws. But we're going to have two different approaches to how to darshan them. And before they bring us Rabbi Akiva, which is really what we're looking for, they're going to start with Rabbi Eliezer's approach of how to darshan this pasuk. So we started already. We said from the Ola you learn that it needs a kli. Kli, we explained in the end, is a knife. They have to be done. You have to slaughter it with a knife. Second thing, mincha. We learn, just like mincha is only eaten by the remainders of the mincha, is only eaten by the male kohanim. Likewise, other korbanot are only eaten by male kohanim. So now they say, which other ones? First of all, not all of them are only eaten by male kohanim. Shlamim, for example, the owners eat. Some they're eaten by the kohanim and their families, including the women. So what are we talking about? Ichatap Asham, starting at the very last words of Pei Bad Amabet. Ichatap Asham behediktiv. It says it explicitly by them that they're eaten by the male kohanim. So you don't need to learn it from the mincha. If you want to say, well, the public peace offerings, the ones that are communal peace offerings, miribuya dekrayate, that actually comes from a different pasuk. There's a pasuk which actually isn't talking about the zivchei shalmei tzibur. It's actually talking about the mincha, the chatat, and the asham, and it says about them, b'kodesh kodeshim tochlenu, kol zachar yochaloto. They say, but this pasuk isn't really necessary because it already said by each one individually that they're eaten by the male kohanim. So why does it say they're eaten by male kohanim only? To say that extra pasuk is coming to teach you about a different one, about the zivchei shalmei tzibur, the communal peace offerings. So now we're stuck, because if you want to say mincha comes to teach about that these things are eaten by male kohanim, just like these other ones as well, which other ones? The only possibilities are asham and chata, which we already learned, and shlamim, shalmei tzibur, the communal ones, which we already learned from a different pasuk. To which they answer, Tanaihi. It's a machloket tanaim where we learn it from. Some people learn it from the pasuk we just brought, Kodesh Kodeshim Techlenu, and some people learn it from the word mincha in that pasuk. So there's a debate, and as you're going to see, there's a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva about how to darshan each of these words. So obviously Rabbi Akiva is not going to darshan that halacha from mincha. You can say he's the one who darshans it from elsewhere, and maybe there's other people as well. So there's a debate about where exactly to darshan it from, and Rabbi Eliezer has his approach. Chatat. What do we learn from the chatat? Machatat mikadsha bibalua. Just like the chatat. Now, this is a pasuk. It says, Kol asher yigaba yikdash. Okay, I might be paraphrasing the pasuk, but by the chatat it basically says, whatever touches the meat, Kol asher yigaba b'vsara yikdash, becomes sanctified. Meaning, if you have two pieces of meat and one absorbs from the other, has to be absorbing from it, but if it absorbs from the other, that meat takes on the sanctity of the chatat. Okay, so let's say it was a shlamim piece. So shlamim can be eaten for 2 days. Chatat can only be eaten for 1 day. So the shlamim takes on the status of the chatat, that meat, because it touched and came in contact and swallowed, absorbed from the chatat meat. So from chatat we learn, just like this is true for chatat, av kol mekacha bebalua. Anything that touches sacrificial meat takes on the status of that meat. Okay, if it wasn't sacrificial meat, then it is treated like sacrificial meat. Asham. What do we learn from the word asham? Ma asham ein shafir v'shliya kadosh bo. Okay, the placenta. Now I'm trying to remember if I can remember the words in English, but the placenta and maybe the umbilical cord. Okay, I should try to look it up. But what are these two things? I'll just open the Quran for a minute and get the translation. Here, let's just check this quickly. I don't always know everything in the English translation. Shvir v'shliya, a fetal sac and a placenta. Okay, so the fetal sac and the placenta are not sanctified. Now, if you remember, we talked about pregnant animals, and the vlad, the offspring of the pregnant animal, becomes sanctified, but not the sac and the placenta. Okay? Now, av kol, now this is true for an asham. Why is it true for an asham? Interesting reason. Because asham is always male. So there is no shvir v'shliya. So, just like in asham, there is none, and therefore it's not sanctified. Av kol ein shvir v'shliya kadosh bo. Even when you have a female animal that happens to be pregnant, and you sanctify it, the sac and the placenta are not going to be sanctified. Now, this, you have to realize, this is based on danim efshar mishi efshar, which is actually okay because this is Rabbi Eliezer, who that's what he did in the previous section, right? Said, we can learn something when it's impossible, right? In Asham, it's impossible to have a shvir and shliya. So that's why it's not sanctified. Who's to say you're going to learn that from other things? But if you say danim efshar mishi efshar, you can. So we're going to say kasavar. Okay, in a second we're going to say he holds that danim efshar mishi efshar, which again fits in consistent with Rabbi Eliezer. But the first thing they're going to say is he obviously, now you can learn from what he says, that he sides on one side of a Tannaitic debate, which is kasavar vladot kadoshim b'havayatan hin kadoshim. When we say the vlad of an animal, the fetus, is sanctified, what we mean is, now there's a debate. Does it mean that it's sanctified in utero? Now, if it's sanctified in utero, you would say the shvir and the shliya, everything about it is sanctified, including the sac, including the placenta. But if you say that they're only sanctified when they're born, then only the vlad is sanctified and not the parts that go with it. So then, obviously, Rabbi Eliezer holds that way. That because if you say ein shvir v'shliya kadosh bo, that leads you to say that the vlad becomes sanctified only at birth, not at conception. Okay, and that's a Tannaitic debate, and he sides on that side of the Tannaitic debate. And as I said before, v'danim efshar mishi efshar. And obviously, things you can learn a case where it's possible from a case that's impossible. Miluim. What do we learn about the miluim? Ma miluim, the miluim were the ones they brought on that day of the sanctification of the temple, right? There were 8 days of miluim where they were basically doing special korbanot. Well, what do we learn about the miluim? Ma miluim motrehem b'srefa. If you left the meat beyond the designated time, that's notar. Okay, they call it motrehem. Get burned. That's what it says. Asher yivater mi basal. I'll find you the pasuk in a second. Im yivater mi basar miluim, and then it says you're supposed to burn them if you leave it over. Ve'ein ba'alei chayim motrehem b'sreifa. But if you designated too many animals for the sacrifices of the miluim, and they're left over, and you didn't use them because you had enough, then you don't burn them. Okay? Now, Rashi, the Ketav Yad, explains, well, it just never says that you do, so we assume that you don't. So, av kol, notice they're using the word motrehem in 2 different ways. It's things that are left over. But the first thing is meat that's left over once it's already been slaughtered at a designated time, and then you didn't eat the meat in the right time. And the second thing is live animals that were left over because you didn't sacrifice them. So you don't ever burn them. Av kol motrehem b'sreifa ve'im ba'alei chayim motrehem b'sreifa. So this is true for all korbanot. If you leave the meat beyond the designated time, it gets burned. And the animals beyond their designated time, if you offer them, not beyond, extra animals that you designated and then didn't use, you never burn them. Now, there are different laws about what you do. Like a chatat has to be left to die. The asham, if you remember, grazes until it gets a mum and then you redeem it. There's different laws for different ones, but you definitely don't burn them. Shlamim. Okay, you have to ask a question a bit because Motrehem b'sreifa talks about in general korbanot that the notar is supposed to be burned, the leftover. So you don't really necessarily need that drasha. I didn't really look up if somebody talks about that, but I'm assuming they address that question. Shlamim. Ma shlamim mifaglim umitpaglim. Okay, this is very famous. Pigul, we've learned about it a lot since we started Zvachim. Right, you have this thought that you're going to eat it beyond the designated time, or burn it, or sprinkle the blood, or burn something beyond the designated time. Anyway, the whole pasuk about shlamim, if you remember, is all about, right, Zayin Yud Chet, I think that's where it is all about shlamim. It's introduced with the beginning of the pasuk is the shlamim. So, just like shlamim mifaglim umitpaglim, what is mifaglim umitpaglim? Mifaglim is it causes things to become pigul, meaning if you have a pigul thought about your shlamim while you're bringing it, it messes up not only the shlamim itself, also the libations that go along with it, the nisachim. Also, they become pigul. Again, the whole pigul means if you eat them, then, right, you're going to get karet. And they're mitpaglim, and they themselves become pigul. If you eat the meat of that offering, it's going to be pigul. So, af kol mifaglim umitpaglim, this same holds true. This holds true for all korbanot as well, not just shlamim. That was all the drasha, what Rabbi Eliezer did with all those words. Now we're going to see b'manita, and that was all quoted, by the way, by Shmuel. Shmuel quoted Rabbi Eliezer. Now we're going to have in a braita, it says, Mishmei de Rabbi Akiva, in the name of Rabbi Akiva, it says, they're going to have different drashot, and then we're going to get to what we're looking for, which is, how do you know the Pesach only can be bought from chulin and not from Maaser Sheni? Zot HaTorah, mincha. Ma mincha mekadesha bebalua, av kol mekadesha bebalua. Well, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, but by the mincha it says the same thing that it said by the chatat. In a minute we're going to say why did it need to have a pasuk by the chatat and by the mincha saying the same thing. That whatever touches the mincha, yikidash. Okay? Also, whatever touches it, and again means absorbs from the mincha, is going to have the status of this mincha offering. Okay? Now, Ma mincha b'kadesha b'balua avko. So all other sacrifices are the same. Mekadesha b'balua, that again, if it's next to something else, it absorbs from it, it's going to have the same status. So now they stop the braita for a minute and they say, okay, here's our comment. Itzrich l'michta b'chatat, itzrich l'michta b'mincha. So again, what Rabbi Eliezer learned from the word chatat, he learns from the word mincha. So now, and then we're going to have to see what was Rabbi Akiva learned from the word chatat. But now they're just asking why they're two psukim in the Torah, both by the chatat and both by the mincha. Why couldn't you learn one from the other? Itzrich l'michta b'chatat, itzrich l'michta b'mincha. And you needed to write it by both. Why? De'i katav rachmana b'mincha mishum d'rekicha bal'a. Well, you might say by a mincha, generally the breads are soft. And because they're soft, they absorb more easily. So you would say that din would only be by a mincha, but maybe by meat where it's a little harder, more solid, or I don't know, solid more, but harder, you might have thought it doesn't absorb. And you could also say the reverse though. If it said it just by the sin offering, you could say mishum de basar agav de shamin kadir. It's much more absorbent because it has fats in it, so it penetrates much more easily. But you would say the mincha isn't fatty, so it doesn't absorb maybe as well. And that's why you need both. Chata. Now what do we darshan from the word chatat? According to Rabbi Akiva, we're back to the braita. That was kind of a break from the braita to just ask a side question. Ma chatat ena ba'ela min hachulin ubiyom ubiyado yemani. 3 halachot about a chatat. Here we have finally what we're looking for. Just like a chatat only comes from chulin and not maaser sheni, and you have to do it during the day and not at night, and you have to do it with your right hand. And from there they learn to all other sacrifices. Those 3 issues. Here we get what we're looking for. That's where he gets the Pesach only comes from chulin. He learns it from chatat, the word chatat in that pasuk. Okay, we have a few things we have to figure out, but before we go figure them out, like how do we know chatat only comes from chulin? Okay, that's the first thing we're going to have to know. Then the Gemara is going to ask questions on the other 2. Okay, biyom is obvious because, well, not obvious, but Rashi tells us. It says in Yom Kippur, ki bayom hazeh yichaper alechem. Bayom, you get kapara. And chatat comes for atoning, so that's the first. Yamin is the etz ben kiuna. If you remember, it says taval etzba'o badam. He dips his finger in the blood, and it says the kohen. Because it says that, we learn it's yad yamin. Okay, and we learn from there to other things as well. Now, but the big important thing is, it says there taval etzba'o yamanit. It says he dips his finger, his right finger. So from there you learn it's right, and then from there we get to this principle wherever it says etzba or kohen, it means you have to do it with your right, and that's what we learned to the other korbanot. But the big question is, or the big thing to point out before we move on, is that Rabbi Akiva, we were looking for where does he learn the Pesach only comes from Chulin. And the answer is he learns it from Chatat, and from Chatat to all other sacrifices, presumably all other sacrifices that are Ba'im B'chovah, right, that are obligatory sacrifices, like a Chatat is obligatory. But what becomes clear from here is he doesn't agree with the Mishnah at all. The Mishnah doesn't fit with him, because what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah says we learn from Pesach to all the other offerings about this topic. And he says we learn from Chatat to all of them, including Pesach. So this answered the question, where does he learn the Pesach comes from Chulin? But at that point, basically, he makes the whole Mishnah a moot point. Right? We don't need the Mishnah according to him. So we now see that the Mishnah actually doesn't go according to him. And the next question, when we finish this whole Braita, the next question of the Gemara is going to be, which we're going to get to at the very bottom of Amud Aleph, what does Rabbi Akiva do with Zavach Pesach? Right? What does he do with the word Bakar? Okay, because he obviously doesn't use it for teaching, other sacrifices are like the Pesach. So that's just an important point, because we thought that the Gemara was just saying, okay, where does he get Pesach? Rabbi Eliezer gets it from here, Rabbi Akiva gets it from there, and then they both fit in with the Mishnah. Once you have from Pesach, you learn to everything else. But no, that's not what's happening here. Okay, but now let's understand Chatat Gufa Minal, and where do we get the Chatat from? Amar Rav Chisda de Amar Kravi, Kriv Aharon et Parachatat Asher Lo, Mishalo V'lo Mishal Ma'aser. It says Aharon brings the Parachatat, which is his, and what does it mean, his? It has to be bought from his stuff and not from things that don't belong to him, like Maaser Sheni, which is sanctified. Okay, and from there you get it. This is also from Yom Kippur service. Biyom. So now they say, wait a minute. You don't need a drasha biyom to learn it from the Ki Bayom Hazeh Yechaper, which was talking about a chatat, and to learn from there to everything else, because biyom tzavoto nafka, that last pasuk after V'zot Torah lemincha, V'zot HaTorah le'olah lemincha lechatat, etc., it says right after that pasuk, the very last pasuk in the section there, says, Asher tziva Hashem et Moshe, that God commanded Moshe, Bahar Sinai, biyom tzavoto b'nei Israel, on the day he commanded the Jews. From there, they darshan, all korbanot are done during the day. Okay, because the summary of all the sacrifices, and since, right, we're in the world of drashot, it's certainly not the simple reading, but biyom there teaches you that all sacrifices are done during the day and not night, so you don't need to learn it from chatat. To which they answer, Kedei Nasba. Okay, they just added it, because it also appears by Chatat, but it's not really what you learn from Chatat. And same thing we're going to do with the next one, because Biyado Yemani, either Rabbi Bar Bachana, Nafkadam, Rabbi Bar Bachana, Marish Lakish, Kol Makom Shneimar Etzba V'Kuna, Enu Eli Yamin. Rabbi Bar Bachana says in the name of Rish Lakish that anytime it says Etzba or Keuna, it says en, but it really means or here. Again, there were different opinions about this. But he says anytime it says Etzba or Keuna, it must be right. So he doesn't learn it from chatat. He learned from the word chatat. He learns it from this principle. And then anytime it says kohen or etzba, and kohen appears by all the sacrifices, it has to be yad yamin. So that also isn't learned from chatat in this pasuk, to which they answer kedei nas. But fine, it was just there. Asham. What do we do? What does he do with the word asham? And that's going to end the drashot of Rabbi Akiva. They don't show what he does with every single word. Ma asham atzmotav mutarin, av kol atzmotav mutarin. Just like by asham, you can use the bones for other things. Also here, in all other sacrifices, you can use the bones for other things. Okay. Rashi says, right, let's just see for a minute where he gets it from. I'm not sure where the source is by asham. I didn't look that up, where we know that that's the case, but we're going to leave that issue aside right now. I'm just wondering if it says it quickly somewhere else. Yeah, I don't know exactly where they get it from asham, but okay. But we're going to learn from asham that the bones are permitted. Okay. Rabbi Akiva. Now we get back to the basic question that I said we're going to get to, which is, okay, if he learns it all from chatat in this pasuk, and he doesn't, and from there he learns to all the other things that are davar shebechovah, including the Pesach. So Rabbi Akiva, Havizavachta Pesach, my avidly. What's he going to do with that Havizavachta Pesach? And now we're moving to Hamoed. So they answer, Mibayle lechid Rav Nachman. He needs it for this drasha of Rav Nachman. To Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav Ravua, Minay lemotar Pesach, shekarev shlamim. How do we know that leftover animal from Pesach that you didn't use for Korban Pesach can be used as a shlamim? Okay, this we learned in the very beginning of Masechet Zvachim, if you remember, that basically a Pesach Bizmana is on the day of Yudal. It has to be brought as Korban Pesach. But Pesach Shelo Bizmana could be brought as a Shlamim. And it kind of morphs into a Korban Shlamim. So now they answer, right? Motar Pesach, how do we know that it's Karev Shlamim? Shnema, V'zavachta Pesach l'Hashem Elokecha tzonu bakal. And again, we're going to ask the same question. Hello, ein Pesach ba'al minak fasimu minizim. So what's bakar doing there? So elam, bakar is a reference to the fact that a Pesach, we're going to see right now, motar a Pesach yehe ledavar haba min hatzonu u'min bakal. A Pesach can be brought if it's, let's say, a leftover animal from a Korban Pesach that you never used, you designated but then didn't use it. You can use it for a sacrifice that can be brought from Tzonu Bakar, which is a Shlamim. You can basically bring a Pesach as a Shlamim if it's not the day of Pesach. To which they say, wait a minute, we don't learn it from that Pasuk, we learn it from a different Pasuk. And now we're going to bring, and then we're going to say, we don't learn it from that Pasuk, we learn it from a different. And in the end, we're going to have 3 different Pasukim teaching the same law, and then we're going to say, why do we have 3 Pasukim? And that's how we're going to end the chapter with an explanation of what each of these 3 is coming for. We learn it from there. What do you mean? We learn it from where the father of Shmuel learned it from. Dichtiv, as it says, now, instead of learning it from a Pesach about Korban Pesach, the Pesach sacrifice, they're going to learn it from a Pesach about a Shlamim. In the 3rd chapter of Vayikra, it starts discussing if you bring Korban Shlamim, and if you bring it from this animal, from that animal, this is what you should do. So it starts off, it doesn't start off, but the section here that we're talking about is Pasuk Zayin or Vav. Im min hatzon korbano lezevach shlamim. If you bring it from the tzon family, which includes sheep and goats. Now, could have just said im min hatzon korbano, but it adds the words lezevach shlamim. Now, we know we're talking about a shlamim. We're in the chapter about shlamim, it already mentioned shlamim. So why does it add those words? Amar v'uat Shmuel, davar haba min hatzon. The im min hatzon is basically saying, we're referencing Pesach in the Pasuk. Okay, in the first Pasuk we said we're referencing Shlamim in the Pasuk about Pesach. Here we're saying we're referencing Pesach in the Pasuk about the Shlamim. So, im min hatzon korbanot lezevach shlamim, right? Davar haba min hatzon yeh lezevach shlamim. Okay, so something that comes from the tzon Pesach can be brought as the Shlamim. That's the drasha in this Pasuk. To which again the Gemara says, what do you mean you're getting it from there? Kati mehacha nafka, you think it's from there? Mehatam nafka, it actually comes from a different pasuk. Titania, it says in a Braita, keves, l'rabot et ha-pesach la'aliyah. It actually is kesef. Okay, after that it says im kesef. Okay, that's pasuk zayin. This was pasuk vav. Pasuk zayin is im kesef umakriv. Pasuk chet is im ez umakriv. Okay, actually not pasuk chet, pasuk yubet. Okay. So it's set up like this: im min hatzon, which is the general category. Then it says im kesef, and then it says im ez. So the question is going to be, why does it specify each one separately? So the drasha is kesef lahavi pesach et ha-pesach la'aliyah. Okay, this is not related to our topic, but it's to teach you about a korban pesach also, which is brought from ksavim or kvasim. That when you bring a keves, a sheep, you burn the tail in a regular sacrifice. Now with the korban pesach, you actually roast the meat whole. So you might have thought maybe you don't burn the tail, even though in other korbanot shlamim, right, a pesach is a type of shlamim, but it's its own type. And you're supposed to roast the animal whole. So it could be that you leave the tail on. So this is coming to teach you the rules of a kesef by shlamim are going to apply also to pesach in terms of the tail being burned. Okay, the kesef, or the keves, the sheep has a fatty tail, and that's why it gets burned on the altar. Kishu omer im kesef. Now why did it start with the words if a kesef? Lahavi Pesach she'avra shnato u'shlamim habe'im machma Pesach l'chol mitzvat shlamim. Okay, here's our issue. A Pesach where you took an animal and then it got too old. Okay, a Pesach has to be an animal within its first year. If it became 2 years old or past its first year, then you wouldn't be able to bring it anymore. So what do you do with it? Either that, okay, we're going to see it becomes a shlamim and it has all the laws of shlamim upon it. In addition, and this isn't related to our issue, a shlamim haba'im machmat Pesach. On the night of Pesach, they were bringing what we call korban chagiga, a bunch of shlamim to basically fill in so that people would have more meat and they would eat a la sova, as we say. In case they didn't have enough meat to eat, we want people to be satiated that night. So if your korban Pesach wasn't big enough, they would have other shlamim to go with it. So all those, so either a Pesach that missed its time, or, right, and it's got too old, or a shlamim that comes the night of Pesach, L'chol mitzvat shlamim. All the rules of shlamim apply. For so sheyitanu smicha. You do smicha on the korban. You lean on it. Nisachim, you bring the libations with it, and Shnufach Hasev Shok, and you wave the breast and the thigh. Kishur Mer V'im Eis. Okay, we're just continuing in the bride to this. Really, we got to our main point, which is we learn already from the word V'im Kesef that it also references that a Pesach could be brought as a shlamim if it got too old. Okay, and therefore couldn't be used as a korban Pesach. Kishur Mer V'im Eis Hifsikayan Limed Al Eis She'ena Tuna Aliyah. So why does it say and if an Eis, and if it's a goat? Why do they add the word and if? To basically say we're making a separation between this and the previous. This is different. In what way is it different? That you don't burn the aliyah, you don't burn the fatty tail, because there is no fatty tail. They have a much thinner tail and it doesn't get burned. Okay, the Eis has a different law in terms of the tail. Again, that's really an issue for shlamim, not really related to our topic. Okay. Anyway, the point being that now we have 3 different psukim, which each teach you that when a Pesach isn't brought for its own sake, right, for the Pesach, it's brought as a shlamim. Why do we need 3 psukim? Well, there are 3 psukim here. They're each coming for a different case. 1, it passed its time, meaning it's too old, and it passed Pesach. You didn't bring it that Pesach, and now it got too old. 1, it passed its time, but it was still within the year that you could bring in, as still within its first year. And 1, it's not too old yet, it's still the right age, and it's not even Pesach yet. But if you bring it on, say the 1st of Nisan, it's going to be a shlamim. Okay, all those cases it's going to be brought. If you sacrifice it, it'll be brought as a shlamim. And sriche. Now we have to explain, and with this will end the chapter, what do you need each of these 3 for? Why do they each need their own pasuk? If you had it past its time, but not its date, meaning it still could be brought, you'd say, it missed both. Right, it's too old and it missed the date of Pesach. Mishum avraz mano and avrash nato. Mano is Pesach past and avrash nato, and it's too old. Mishum de'itchele legamri. Well, that one is completely rejected. So that maybe you would say, fine, that could become a shlamim because there's no way it could ever be a Pesach. But avraz mano v'lo avrash nato. But if the time for Pesach passed, but it wasn't too old yet, you might say, Dechaze Pesach Sheni, maybe leave it for Pesach Sheni, maybe it can't be used as shlamim. Emalo, right? So maybe it wouldn't be a shlamim, since it could be used still for Pesach Sheni. V'i, obviously we're talking about if it's between Pesach Rishon and Pesach Sheni. If you had the case where it passed its time, but it's still within the age frame, and then you had the second pasuk, and you'd say, well, that one could be a shlamim because it already missed its time of the real Pesach, even though it could have been brought for Pesach Sheni, but it missed its main slot. And that's why it morphs into a shlamim. But if it's not yet Pesach, it's the 1st of Nisan, and it's still within the time, the age that you could do it, you might say, right, it could still be brought for Pesach, maybe bringing it in the wrong time, right, bringing it early, wouldn't turn it into a shlamim because it really still could be used as Pesach. Emalo, you might have thought not. Sricha. That's why you need the 3rd one to tell you, no, even that is going to be a shlamim. Anytime you take a Pesach and sacrifice it, not in its time, it is a shlamim. And with that, Hadran ala chatodai tava. Now we're going to finish that chapter, and we're now going to just review the daf before we start with the next chapter, because it's already a different topic. So what we did right now was we had the Mishnah, where it said, how do you know that Davar Shebechovah, this Harei Alai Todah, is only from the Chulin? You learn it from Pesach, which we then learned was only Rabbi Eliezer's approach. Rabbi Eliezer says we get it from Pesach because Pesach is learned from Pesach Mitzrayim, when they had no, or even Pesach in the desert, where they had no Maser Sheni. They couldn't have done it from Maser Sheni then, so even now we can't do it. We learn one from the other. Then Rabbi Akiva didn't agree with that whole theory because in Danim Efshar Mishi Efshar, plus he had some other issue about, it wasn't the same type of korban at all. And then we said he learns it from Chatat in that pasuk. He actually doesn't learn it from Pesach. He thinks it's true that Pesach can only be brought from Chulin, but because it's all learned out from Chatat, and from there he gets to everything we said in our Mishnah. But basically he disagrees with our Mishnah because our Mishnah darshan the whole thing from Pesach. Then we had to figure out, well, the whole drasha from Pesach to other korbanot came from the fact that Bakar is mentioned in the context of Pesach, and there is no Bakar in a korban Pesach. So they said, it must be referencing other sacrifices as well, have the same rules as Pesach, that only comes from Chulin. That was all Rabbi Eliezer. But what's Rabbi Akiva going to do with that pasuk? He's going to learn it for a Pesach that can't be brought because it's past its time, or before its time, or right past its age, is going to be a shlamim. And that's what we learn from that there's Bakar. requires a reference to a shlamim. Then we saw 2 other psukim in the top of the same thing. And then we explained each of the 3 was necessary because each one's talking about a different case and you couldn't have learned one from the other. Now we're going to start with a new chapter. Chol korbanot hatzibur vayachid ba'im min ha'aretz u'michutz la'aretz min ha'chadash u'min ha'yashan chutz min ha'omer shtei halechem she'enam ba'in ela min ha'chadash u'min ha'aretz. So let's start the first part before we move on. Every individual and communal mincha offering can be brought either from the land of Israel, the grains, right, the wheat, the solet, the flour, or from Israel, outside of Israel. It can be brought from the new crop or from the old crop. Okay, and as you might have thought, this is what we mean after Chadash is permitted. You can bring it from the new grains, and you might have thought you have to because they're new and fresher, but you can even bring it from the old grains as well. Except for 2 korbanot, the korban ha'omer and the shtei halechem. Those can only be brought from Chadash, from the new crop, and only from the land. Okay, we're going to see where we get this from when we get to the Gemara. V'kulan, and all of these menachot, einam ba'in ela min ha'muvchar. They're taken from the better stuff. Okay, ezu muvchar, what is the muvchar shelahem? Mechnis v'zatcha alpha l'solet. Okay, machnis, some people think it's michmas, okay, which is not far from Ma'ale Adumim, or Zatcha. The location of all these places isn't really so known. Okay, these are the best places for solet. Shniya lahem, next in line is Afulayim Babik'ah. Some people think it's near Jerusalem, some people I think put somewhere near Tiberia. Kol ha'aratzot hayu ksherot, any place really is kasher, ela mikan hayu mevi'im. Okay, this sentence could mean 2 things depending on what you're talking about. We already said that Omer and Shtei halechem have to come from Israel. So when it says kol ha'aratzot, it means anywhere in the land you can take it, but better to take it from here. And when it comes to the regular menachot, it means any land in the world you could take it from, but ideally you should take it from these places. Okay. Now the Gemara points out, just to review, all menachot, all other menachot can be brought, chadash or yashan, could be brought from the land, from outside the land of Israel, but Omer and Shtei halechem have to come only from chadash and only from the land. Now we're going to see that both those are subjects of debate. Okay, first we're going to see only the debate on one issue. Manitin deloki ai tana, our Mishnah doesn't match this Tana, the Tanya that we see in a Braita. Omer haba min hayashan kasher, shtei halechem haba min hayashan ksherot, ela shechiser mitzvah. This Braita says that the Omer, the shtei halechem, can actually be brought from the old crop. You missed a mitzvah, like you didn't do it the best, but it's fine. Okay, it's good, which goes against our Mishnah. So notice they're specifically arguing about, they're disagreeing about Chadash and Yashan issue, not about outside of Israel. Now we're going to see why. Omer d'chtiv takrivit mincha bikurecha va'afilu min ha'aliyah. Now the simple reading of that is bring it from the mincha bikurecha. Bikurecha means first. That means you have to use the new crop. But because it says takriv, that's a word that means, well, sacrifice it in any case. Even from the aliyah. Aliyah often means the best. That's not what they mean here. Aliyah means from the upstairs in the attic. That's where they would store things. From your storage from last year. Shtei halechem, dichtiv, mimoshvotechem, taviu, v'lo min chutz la'aretz. Okay, the first thing in here, we got this halacha in the Mishnah. How do we know it has to come from the land of Israel? Because it says, mimoshvotechem, from the places where you're dwelling. Dwelling places usually means the land of Israel. So not from outside of Israel. And mimoshvotechem, afilu min ha'aliyah. Bring it from the land of Israel, but anywhere in the land of Israel, meaning even if it's old crop. So the Gemara says, "Hafikte, wait, you already darshan moshvotechem to teach you nachutz la'aretz. How can you say it also includes old?" Well, amakrat taviu va'afilu min ha'aliyah. No, because it says mi moshvotechem taviu, just like we had takriv. Any way you want to bring it, taviu means bring any of them, even if it's the old grains. V'hai mebaylesh. They say, wait a minute, the word taviu is used for a different drasha. You can't say it's from taviu, and moshvotechem is brought from a different drasha, so how are you getting to the fact that you can bring it even from the old crop? So what's the drasha taviu is needed for? Any other sacrifice you bring that's like the shtei halechem, what makes the shtei halechem unique? It's chametz. The only other chametz one is 10 of the loaves of the Toda offering are chametz. So they're not going to say any other ones you bring that are like this, meaning the Toda, the 10 loaves, you bring in the same way you bring this, meaning this is 1 isaron per loaf. That's also going to be 1 isaron per loaf, which is about 2 kilo per loaf. Okay, that's a big loaf. Okay, so now they say, how are you going to learn taviu then to teach even min aliyah? Im kain lichtov krat tavi, my taviu shmat min atarte. Classic. Answer, well, if it had said tavi, bring, in singular, we would have learned one thing. Because it says it in plural, we can learn two. And with that, we have our answer. So they learn from taviu and from takriv that the omer and the shtei alechem can come even from the old crop. Now they say, wait a minute. V'haktiv reshit. Doesn't it say reshit? Okay, it says reshit, bring the first by the omer, and it also says it by shtei alechem. So how can you say that? So they say, le mitzvah. Okay, I'll read you the psukim. When you come to the land that I bring you, k'tzartem k'tzira, v'iveitem et omer reshit k'tzirchem, the first things you harvest, that you cut. And korban reshit takrivu otam la'Hashem, that's the shtei alechem, the first. So it seems like it has to come from the first, so they say, le mitzvah. No, that's just ideally. But if you did it from the old, it works. Wait a minute. Haktiv chadasha, but doesn't it say by the korban, by the shtei alechem, hikraftem mincha chadasha? Chadasha sounds like from the new crop. So now that it's repeated in the shtei alechem, what do we learn? Anything that's repeated is le'akev, means it's essential, it has to be done that way. So what do we do with that? The answer, no. Sheteheh chadasha l'chol menachot. That chadasha, I skipped a line. Hai mebai le'lechidetanya. The chadasha is needed for the following braita. Rabbi Natan v'Rabbi Kiva amru. Shtei alechem abo ben hayashan kshirot. Now we see, by the way, that Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Kiva are the ones who have this braita. They're the ones who think it can be brought from the old crop. Okay, we're still in the middle of a sentence here, but I just want to point out that means that our Mishnah that holds it has to be brought from the new crop doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, which is just what we said about the previous Mishnah, also doesn't hold like Rabbi Akiva, which makes sense, right? I mean, it doesn't have to be that way, but it makes sense that the Mishnayot here just don't follow Rabbi Akiva's approach. And what do they say? So, Hamani Makayim Chadasha. So, what do we do with Chadasha if we think it can be brought from the old crop? Sheteheh Chadasha l'chol menachot. This is a halacha that's very known, which you might not know, but now you'll know it, which is that when you bring the shtei alechem, when you bring the korban omer, the minchat omer, you bring it from the new crop, and it permits, this is the whole thing of chadash, it permits all the new grains that were harvested that year. Okay, until then you can't eat the new grains. But at that point, you're still not allowed to use them for sacrifices. So from that point on, you're still using old grains for sacrifices. Only with the shtei alechem, it's called the mincha chadasha, because it's the first one you can bring. It permits, it's the permitter, for after that you can bring other sacrifices on the altar from the new grains. But until then, you can't. That's what chadasha is used for. And therefore, it's not used to repeat the fact that it's supposed to be brought from the new to then say, well, it's essential. So now we have, what's their basis? Well, there's no reason to say it can't be brought from the yashan, because we have takriv and we have taviu. Those two words include even from the old. And we don't have to worry that it says reshit and it says chadasha, because reshit is telling you, well, ideally bring from new, not that you have to. And chadasha is used to just say this is the first one of many, right? This is permitting all the other sacrifices after this from here on in to be brought from the new crop. Okay, so now this good summary sentence which goes into tomorrow's daf, but we'll just start it. Ad kan lo pligi ela b'chadash, aval ba'aretz lo pligi. Omer v'shtei alechem me'aretz in, mechutz la'aretz lo. So here we have that, and this is a good summary. What we've seen so far, it's the best summary of the daf here, that the Mishnah doesn't permit, right, only from the new and only from Israel. The Braita that we just saw, which we could say is Rabbi Natan and Rabbi Kiva's position, is that, or maybe others also, we don't know, but they for sure think it could be brought from the old, but none of them think it could be brought from outside of Israel, those two. Right? All the other Menachot, yes, but not those two. Okay, and that's where they disagree, right? So they agree with the Mishnah that they have to be brought from Israel, but they don't agree about the Yashan. They think old crop is fine. And with that, we finish. We did our summary now of this, and we did the summary before of the first part. So with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Tov, Moadim L'Simcha.